My apologies, I cannot be there in person after ending up in the COVID sin bin earlier this week. The aim of today's presentation is to provide a progress update with respect to recent work by Barton Gold at the Tunkillia project. The presentation will start with an overview and recap on some of the past work and project history, more so with a view to putting this into a contemporary perspective and outline the opportunity Tunkillia presents. It has been 10 years since this project has seen any significant on-ground work, and similarly 10 years since that work was presented at this forum. Firstly, this slide provides an overview of the company's ground holdings, and the Tunkillia project is at the southern end of these tenement groups. I'll start off with a very brief geological recap to remind everyone about what this system looks like. So the Tunkillia project lies within the Albrinda Shear Zone and adjacent to the boundary of some major crustal domains. Not far to the north of Tunkillia, the Yurta Shear Zone marks the boundary with the Archean Age Mulgathing complex to the north. The north-south Albrinda Shear Zone rotates to the northwest as it merges with the Yurta Shear Zone, with this marking the boundary between the St Peter Suite to the west and the younger Hildeborough-aged intrusions and Gawler Range volcanics to the east. The actual Albrinda Shear Zone is characterised by variably deformed Tunkillia Suite lithologies, which are demagnetised along the margins at Tunkillia and accompanied by extensive hydrothermal alteration. The key takeaway from this is that Tunkillia is located at a major regional boundary which has been the focal point for multiple deformation events, as well as a likely conduit for igneous intrusions and hydrothermal fluid flow events, all really good ingredients for the formation of gold deposits. A quick look at the deposit scale and some of the key rock units. The host rocks to the system are a range of 1685 million year Tunkillia Suite intrusives, intruded by later Mesoproterozoic units. Starting on the hanging wall side or the left of screen to the system, we have the Tunkillia Algan gneiss, which occurs as both a massive unit and in places also with a strong foliation. A zone of myelitinized and strongly silica-sericite altered Algan gneiss occurs in the hanging wall of the system and is interpreted as having formed during the early stages of the development of the Albrinda Shear Zone, and has likely also been deformed post-mineralisation. Around the central part of the deposit is a zone referred to as the Central Alteration Zone, or CAZ, but is essentially an intensely sericite chlorite altered part of the Algan gneiss, and this alteration has likely contributed to the rheological preconditioning of the host rocks for subsequent mineralising processes. The footwall to the system is marked by the footwall granite, a less altered and more massive unit that has been tectonically recrystallised. Higher grade mineralisation in the deposit is hosted within extensive quartz veins, plus or minus sulphides, dominantly galena, mostly within the Central Alteration Zone, although there are other mineralised lodes and zones within the system. The entire Tunkillia system is essentially characterised by an extensive anomalous gold halo. Lastly, the system has been intruded by some undeformed mafic dikes, although it is likely they are exploiting pre-existing structural pathways related to mineralising processes. A detailed discussion on the structural setting is beyond the scope of this overview, but I will comment on some key aspects. A robust structural model and interpretation is important for both resource domaining and predicting where to find additional resources in these sort of systems. It would be fair to say there is a reasonable degree of apparent complexity in this system. Some of the key takeaways are that the mineralised quartz sulphide veins generally mimic the main foliation and were likely to have been placed at the end of the development of the main S1 foliation. The Tunkillia deposit was subject to brittle ductile shearing during the main mineralising event, as evidenced by features such as warp and kink style folding of S1, as shown in the picture of drill core in this slide. Understanding the plunge controls on mineralisation is obviously key to predicting where additional resources can be defined. One school of thought, as per the cartoon on this slide, is the development of mineralised veins as sin shearing, west side up dip slip tensile vein arrays, leading to the development of sub-horizontal rollover style dilational jogs, which is supported by observations in drill core. Another line of thinking, derived from broader scale observations and interpretation, is that the Albrinda Shear Zone records a dextral strike slip history that will produce folds with a steep to sub-vertically plunging fold axes. Both of these lines of interpretation are broadly supported by the distribution of mineralisation, and the key takeaway here for us at this time is that careful consideration of the structural information will be important to targeting and expanding the resource base of the project. Barton's approach is to take on board the various interpretations and test them accordingly. move on from the geological aspects now and talk more about the project. Whilst the Tunkillia project has been around for some time, it is worth reflecting on some of the project history to appreciate the opportunity that is presented at this time. This is a fairly busy slide, but I'll walk through the various elements presented. So firstly, on the axes we have time along the bottom, and we have gold price on the vertical axes. We have the gold price in both US and Australian dollars in dollars of the day as the solid lines. And then we have the inflation adjusted gold prices indexed back to 1995 when the project was when work first commenced on this project. Across the top we have the history of corporate ownership. We can see the various companies involved with Helix, Acacia, AngloGold, Minotaur, Mungana, then through to WPG, and since late 2019 Barton Gold. The next line down shows the history of drilling, and we can see that most of this drilling happened fairly early on in this project. The next line down shows the discovery timeline and the posting of mineral resource estimates. Below that, with the blue outlines, is when feasibility studies have been undertaken. So Tunkillia was discovered in late 1996 and took just over 7 years for the first mineral resource estimate to be posted. Several mineral resource estimates have been undertaken over the years with differing approaches to domaining the ore body and resulting in generally either higher grade, lower inventory, or lower grade and higher inventory. Following the acquisition of the Tunkillia project in 2019, Barton commissioned a comprehensive analysis and remodelling of the 223 deposit, which identified a number of deficiencies with the previous modelling, including a low outer wireframe threshold of 0.1 grams per tonne gold and with no internal subdomains. This effectively expanded the outer boundaries and blurred the internal boundaries of the mineralised wireframe for a broader, diluted model with lower average grades. Barton's approach was to remodel the deposit, applying a higher outer wireframe threshold of 0.3 grams per tonne and a cut-off grade of 0.4 grams per tonne within an optimised pit shell. This effectively sharpened up the grade distribution and minimised the smearing between subdomains, and dilution of the model at the model periphery was significantly reduced. The two feasibility studies completed to date have both concluded that the project is technically feasible, and it was essentially the financial modelling and prevailing economic conditions at the time that precluded advancing the project. So some takeaways from this project history. The majority of resource drilling undertaken on this project was done at a US dollar gold price of between $500 and $1,000. And we find ourselves in a very different price environment today, even when the effects of inflation are taken into consideration. The depth extent of drilling on the deposit has largely been constrained by pit optimisation parameters that were applied at the time, typically within 150 metres vertically of mineralisation. As an aside, but as a potentially relevant point of comparison, the Australian gold industry is now seeing the development of other gold projects that historically have been considered to have lower grade profiles. Now, whilst Tunkillia is not yet at the tenor of the examples noted here, it has also not seen a great deal of exploration drilling in nearly 10 years. What this slide shows quite clearly, though, is that the gold market has shifted significantly since the project feasibility was last considered, and even when taking into consideration inflation over this time, Tunkillia does present a real opportunity for development in the near term. Aside from a higher gold price improving the economics of this project, finding additional resources is a priority for Barton and what I will cover for the rest of the presentation. In the course of the deposit, remodelling for the resource estimation undertaken in 2020, potential higher grade zones were also interpreted where mineralisation is bounded on its eastern margin by intrusive dikes. The 2021 program in the central 223 deposit was designed to test the potential continuity of high-grade gold mineralisation and the nature of the bounding structures against the mafic dikes. This program was successful in confirming this interpretation, with a section from one of those holes shown in this slide, along with the significant intervals reported from this drill hole. This has effectively provided additional confidence in the interpretation and the domaining applied in this 2020 mineral resource estimate. This year, Barton has embarked on a drilling campaign to both increase the vertical extent of mineralisation at Tunkillia and with a view to being able to expand the resource inventory of the deposit. These graphics present a long section through the approximate centre of the deposit. The deposit extends for approximately 2.5 kilometres north-south, with the major grid lines in this graphic at 500 metre spacings. The minor grid lines are at 100 metre spacings, and this demonstrates the vertical extent of the system largely being limited to 150 metres depth of mineralisation, recognising, of course, there is approximately 50 metres of overburden associated with the deposit. The Australian $3,000 pit shell that has been used to constrain the resource estimate work to date is also shown on this profile. The broad aims of the drilling currently underway are to test the steep southerly plunge thesis for higher grade mineralisation beneath the current pit shell, similarly test the concept of a much shallower near horizontal plunge in one area, provide additional drill coverage support to many parts of the deposit that lack drill data beneath the current pit shell, thereby limiting the ability to extend mineralised domains at depth. Before we embarked on this program, we undertook a high-level scoping exercise to help guide us to the parts of the system with a better potential economic outcomes. We essentially extended the existing block model vertically and constrained this within a slightly higher value pit shell. What this suggested, particularly at the southern end of the system, is that wider zones of +1 gram per tonne gold have the potential to push the existing pit deeper. We expect to complete around 30 holes along the majority of the system, with most holes targeting positions within 50 metres vertically of the existing pit shell. A number of these drill holes will be diamond core with the express intention of improving understanding of the structural setting of the system. We have not been immune to the logistical challenges of rig availability and dodging the never-ending rain events, but we are anticipating completing this work just before Christmas. Outside of the 223 deposit, one of the higher priority district targets Barton has focused on is Area 51, approximately 4 kilometres along strike from the 223 deposit. This area has had a long history of exploration interest, but it is only the recent work that has proven the strike continuity of the system and the potential for economic gold grades. In the next few slides, I will run through a very brief chronology of the past work before looking at the outcomes from the recent Barton drilling. On this slide we have calcrete sampling data overlain on magnetic data, which provided the initial impetus for drill targeting. Very early calcrete sampling delineated a broad zone of gold anomalism, with the centre of this anomaly offset immediately to the east of the western demagnetised zone. Follow-up RAB drilling identified an extensive blanket of anomalous gold in the weathered bedrock. Several phases of RC drilling by different companies have had mixed results over the years. The earliest drilling in 1997 drilled across the system as we now know it, but only intersected a wide zone of sub-economic mineralisation, as this section shows. RC testing of the RAB anomalies returned very little gold in the fresh basement, having tested too far to the east. The drilling by WPG in 2016 did have 2 holes that drilled very close or through the system, but did not have enough across-strike coverage to properly test the zone. Barton's drilling is shown here in the red collars and was successful in providing a comprehensive test both across the western demagnetised zone and for 500 metres along strike. The RC drilling conditions are a little challenging downhole in places, but all drill holes made it to depth. This program has successfully defined gold mineralisation with 500 metres of strike continuity and is not yet closed out. The geology of this prospect appears very similar to the 223 deposit, with alga gneiss in the hanging wall, an extensive zone of alteration and shearing in the centre, and the relatively underformed footwall granite beneath this. Intervals of myelinite and filanite are also recorded. The alteration halo around this prospect area is extensive and in places quite intense. In the centre of the system, it is typically strongly sericitised, with intensive K-feldspar red rock alteration beyond this and gradually dropping away. The better zones of mineralisation are associated with quartz veins plus or minus sulfides, including some intervals of quartz sulfide breccia. 2 recent Barton holes are shown in this section, but it also shows one of the drill holes from 2016 that drilled through part of the zone, but the program did not have enough drill coverage to fully test the zone. The forward program at this prospect includes further drilling to test this system another 50 metres vertically, and will include several oriented diamond core holes to assist in the geological interpretation from an early stage. The plan at Tunkillia going forwards is to complete the current drilling programs, which will feed into an updated mineral resource estimate early in the new year. Beyond this, we have ADI funding support to apply the ultrafine geochemical sampling workflow to Tunkillia and evaluate whether this technique has potential to improve the reliability of surface sampling in this district. The broader extent of the Albrinda shear zone has effectively been starved of exploration for the past 10 years, and we have a number of targets being worked up for testing in the new year as well. So to conclude, we believe there is certainly a lot of potential in the Tunkillia project, both from the perspective of what is already known at the project, but also in the exploration upside across the rest of the tenement holdings. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the rest of the day. Stay away from COVID. And lastly, a shameless plug to make sure you go and check out the Grenadier in the next room. Thanks very much.